Okay, hello there. So this video is about the genetic code. So in this video, we're going to talk about what DNA is, what makes it up, what its job is, where you find it, and what the end result is whenever DNA is done doing its job. Okay, so let's talk about first of all, what is DNA? So DNA is a series of chromosomes inside every cell. So you may think of DNA as like this single double helix that you might find inside of the cell, but that's actually just one part of it. Okay, so DNA is actually this might be like a chromosome, and DNA is actually what we refer to as the combination of all these different chromosomes that are in every cell in your body. So when we say DNA, we're talking about all of the chromosomes together collectively make up what we call DNA. And in human cells, there are 46 of these chromosomes. You might see them labeled as X's on some diagrams, but just pretend that there's 46 of those, and all of those together collectively, like I said, make up what we call DNA. It's not one long solid piece. It's actually 46 smaller chunks. That's in humans. Now, in different organisms, there's different numbers of chromosomes, but we're going to get to that here in just a second. Okay. So the first thing you need to know is that every living thing has DNA. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be us, it could be a mushroom, it could be a bacteria, it could be anything in between. Every single living thing has DNA. Not all living things have a nucleus that surrounds and protects that DNA. That's a eukaryotic feature, but every living thing has the DNA. And the DNA, it has one job. The one job of DNA is to make proteins. You might think of proteins as something that is in meat, and that's what it is. It's protein. It's good for your muscles, right? It's so much more than that. That is just one small part of the entire family of proteins that exists in your body. There are thousands and thousands of different kinds of proteins, and your body is basically just a bunch of these proteins all put together in different ways to make different things. Proteins are like the building blocks of your body, okay? But proteins themselves, if these are the building blocks of your body, well, then what are the building blocks of proteins? The building blocks of proteins are amino acids. Okay, these are the building blocks of proteins, which are the building blocks of your body. And how do you know which amino acids to make? Well, that's where DNA comes in. DNA holds the instructions on how to make proteins. DNA does not actually do the work, the hands-on work of creating the protein. It is just the guy that has the instructions and the know-how on how to do it, and he tells other workers how to build these proteins, but he doesn't actually do the protein building. He just carries the instructions for the protein building, okay? All DNA is made up of just 4 components. So once again, all living things have DNA, and it's the same in a bacteria as it is in you, as it is in a mushroom, as it is in an elephant. All DNA is made up of the same 4 stuff, regardless of what organism it's inside of. And those 4 components are what I call GCAT. Okay? G stands for guanine. C stands for cytosine. A stands for adenine. And T stands for thymine. but I just call it GCAT for short, GCAT. All DNA, bacteria DNA, your DNA, everywhere in between, it's all made up of just these 4 different things. It's incredibly simple, okay? So what is the difference between a human DNA and a bacterial DNA? So let me clear some space here. So human DNA and bacterial DNA, what's the difference between the 2 things? Well, they're both made of GCATs, but maybe in the human, it's, if you look at the DNA strand, maybe it looks like this. Maybe it's GCCATTAAT. Now let's pretend that this represents all the DNA inside of a human. Obviously there's much, much more, but I can't write it all out. Okay, so let's just pretend that that is all the DNA inside of a human. In a bacteria, it might just be TTACGG. Okay, so what's the difference here? Now it's made up of the same stuff. It's made up of GCATs, guanine, cytosine, adenine, thymine. But the difference between humans and bacteria is the amount of GCATs and the sequence that they are in. Okay, so that's it. That's literally the only difference between you and the tree outside and the bacteria that's on your hand or on the table. I mean, that's it. It's the number of GCATs and the order that they are in. That is the only difference between one living thing and another, regardless of what it is. Okay, so what does this sequence tell us? So this sequence, once again, remember that the job of DNA is to hold instructions on how to make these proteins. So this is actually a secret code. Okay, so DNA is like a secret code that the order that these nucleotides are in, by the way, GCATs, when I say GCATs, they're called nucleotides. The official name of each one of these is a nucleotide. You might also see that written as nitrogen base. Now, there is a slight difference between these 2 things, but for all intents and purposes, just for beginner biology, just consider these 2 pretty much the same thing, okay? When you see nucleotide or nitrogen base, just know that we're talking about GCATs, okay? GCs, A's, and T's, the 4 components that make up all DNA and all living things. So the secret, there's actually a secret code written in here where depending on the order that these are in, will tell you which amino acids to make and in turn, what proteins to make, okay? So if I change this sequence, maybe this sequence tells me to make protein number 1. Let's just call it protein 1. If I change the sequence from this, from GCC, ATT, AAT, let's say I change it to GCA, CTT, AT, I'm sorry. Yeah, ATA. Let's say I change it to that sequence. It's the same number of letters. It's 369, 369. There's 9 letters, and it's the same number of each letter. The only difference is the order that I put the letters in. This will tell me to make a completely separate protein. Let's call it protein 2. Okay? So the sequence is the code. And that's what tells you to make the protein. If you change the sequence, you change the protein. And what effect does that have on you? Well, proteins control your traits. Different proteins mean different traits. You change the DNA, you change the protein, you change the protein, you change your trait. And this is how change happens in a species over time, is that the DNA might have a random change, like a mutation. That's what mutations are. They're either caused by random natural occurrences or by damage done by the environment. One of those two things can cause a mutation. And when you have a mutation, all you're doing is you're changing the order or the sequence of the DNA. And that changes the protein that gets made, which changes the trait that that living thing has. And most living things have mutations, but they have very small effects on the actual end result on the person. But it's the accumulation of these tiny, tiny changes in this person to the next person, the next person, that over a long period of time add up to be a large noticeable difference. So in closing, remember that DNA is just a series of chromosomes inside of the cell. It has instructions for how to make proteins. Proteins control your traits. All DNA is made up of the same 4 components, G, C, A, and T. Their official name is nucleotides or nitrogen bases. And it's the sequence of these nucleotides that tells you which proteins to make, which control your traits. That's it. Poof, you're smart.